Welcome to the Audible presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Stuart Mandel, joined as always by Bruce Feldman and Ralph Russo for our Sunday reaction show. Don't forget, every episode of the Audible, including this one, is available on YouTube at Audible Show. We're going to get into some action from Week 13, guys, but the whole day, you couldn't help but avoid the fact that there's this even bigger story hovering over the football. And that is the bidding war, if you want to call it that, the derby for Lane Kiffin. On Friday, we were all on Lane Kiffin watch. Is he going to LSU? Is he going to Florida? Is he staying at Ole Miss? We had reported earlier in the week that there was a deadline for him to decide before the Egg Bowl. Well, he meets with Ole Miss's AD, Keith Carter, on Friday. And then Keith Carter comes out and says with a statement that Lane's focused on the Egg Bowl. There will not be a decision on his future or you can expect a decision on his future after that Saturday after the Egg Bowl. I want to get your quick thoughts first on where things stand, and then we're going to get into maybe a little bit of discussion on a discussion that took place about this on game day. Bruce, what's your understanding of where things stand right now?
I would say about a week ago, my hunch was if he was going to go anywhere, it was to Florida. And then I talked to somebody who I would trust on this, who thought, you know what, it's leaning more towards LSU. And that's where I thought it was on heading into the weekend. Who knows what Lane Kiffin's really thinking or wanting to do? We know he seems to really like the attention for sure, because remember, after you had reported about the ultimatum, the next morning he's on Pat McAfee's show and he's bringing one of his players in. It's just a wild dynamic. My understanding is that LSU is offering around close to $100 million for 7 years. That's what some people I trust have said that it's expected to be. I don't think it's going to come down to money from that. I really think it's like, where does Lane Kiffin want to be? I mean, I would say this, we're kind of in uncharted waters here on that, Ralph. And I don't know, what's your sense on how this sets up right now?
Yeah, it's just such a bizarre situation, as you said, and there's like sort of rumors and reports and also some speculation. I mean, we were kind of, I'm not going to like give all the details, but we were kind of chasing our tails a little bit on Friday on various like, he might be here, he might be there, this is going on, that is going on. It's just such a weird situation to put Ole Miss in. It is uncharted. I mean, I was talking to somebody up at Ole Miss and they use that word too. Like, what do you do? Like, you don't want to nuke your season and your chance to win a national championship. So you do have to a certain degree, give him some space if he needs the space. As opposed to saying, get the hell out of here. Just, either make up your mind or we're done. Like, you can't really do that because that would hurt your team and your players, and it's not fair to them. But Stu, we're looking at the possibility of an unprecedented situation. We thought we could get there. We thought we could get there when the playoff expanded and we had early signing day and portal and stuff like that, like ramped up the speed of these coaching searches. We thought we could get there maybe more with G5 coaches who are sort of taking a step up. But the idea that you're doing this within your own conference and you're going to you might go to teams that finished behind you in the standings, it's hard to even say, well, you got to go because it's a better job.
The moment this whole thing turned, guys, was early last week when it came out that Lane Kiffin's family had quietly taken flights to both Gainesville and Baton Rouge just to, do a little sightseeing, check those places out. Like, that's unheard of, whether it takes place in February, much less 2 games left in the season. And so at that point, I think, if I'm Ole Miss, let's get this over with, right? We don't want to we want to win the national championship. We don't want to mess up our season, but this is embarrassing. This is maddening. I don't know if that's exactly what's being said behind the scenes, but I wouldn't blame them if they felt that way. Which brings us to Saturday morning, guys. College game day, obviously somebody's going to address this, right? Nick Saban decides that, well, I'll quote him. This is not a Lane Kiffin conundrum. This is a college football conundrum that we need some leadership to step up and change the rules on how this gets done in terms of coaching searches and opportunity for people to leave. So in other words, he thinks you can blame this all on the calendar, that Lane Kiffin is maybe just a victim of timing and of this calendar where everybody needs to have their new coaches in place. And then Kirk Herbstreit followed that up as well. Both of them basically saying like he should be allowed to coach Ole Miss, right? It would be unfair to the players if he doesn't coach Ole Miss, if he's not able to coach Ole Miss in the playoffs. So starting with you, Ralph, thoughts on that?
Total abdication of responsibility for the coaches creating the system that we have. Complete total abdication. Where is the leadership? Says the leaders. Like, come on, man. Like, I understand that, like, who wanted an early signing day? I am not going to go into a history lesson here, but I do have to say, like, think of like the original sin of the calendar and this idea that like, I need to have my entire team for spring practice. That's the way this is going to be. We need to have all of our players for spring practice. Go back to early enrollment. That was never a thing. It was never a thing. And now all of a sudden, like, that's standard operating procedure that got that high school players blow off the back end of their senior year to get to college so they can start practicing, right? Like, that's a coach's thing. Everything, like, the calendar sucks. And we got all kinds of problems with leadership in college football. But to just push that off on the others and that was done to the coaches is crazy. Bruce.
Yeah, let's not use the word victim here for anything, by the way. I know you're, just kind of use that in passing. But look, my biggest thing with this is the level of hypocrisy we sometimes get from coaches is lamenting the players about, oh, the players have no loyalty. They transfer from this school to that school. And yeah, there's, but maybe there's contracts here or whatever. Are they employees? Are they not employees? Coaches preach commitment and finish. You hear that, you see it on t-shirts, you see it on sweatshirts, you see it around the building. This is, I guess it's a slippery slope. You're saying, oh, the coach is going to leave before the bowl game or whatever. This isn't a bowl game. This isn't an exhibition. This is a team that is a lock to make the playoff at this point. And all of this other stuff, you can say, I don't know if the words were totally focused on getting this team. You can't, it's impossible to be, it's like an oxymoron to be totally focused when you have all this other stuff and your family's taking trips. Doesn't mean Lane Kiffin's not trying to do his best to do that. It's just, there's Nick Saban actually shoved Kiffin out the door when he was trying to do two jobs when he was his offensive coordinator in the playoff. And that was when he was coaching, starting to get settled at FAU. And the calendar was even a little different then. I just think it's like, it's ridiculous when coaches are going to talk about commitment and deride how the players are these days, when the coaches who are making a fortune in some of these cases, and they are saying, well, what am I supposed to do? What is this guy supposed to do? You know what? You made a choice. You made a decision. You made a commitment to the team. If you can't take this job this year, that's the way it works. You can't have everything you want and have it that way. So I don't know, Stu, like that's the one part to me that rings really hollow of like, because we hear so much about how the players have changed. Well, the coaches have changed too.
This is the one area where I feel like, people on ESPN or Fox or whoever will criticize the selection committee, right? Just like we do. They'll criticize the officiating just like we do. But when it comes to coaches, man, there's some real apologists out there. I'm not saying that Saban or anybody should have gone on there and just bashed Lane Kiffin because he actually hasn't made that decision yet to actually bolt on the team. But guys, there's a thing about game day that just drives me crazy. and especially with this discussion, and I've seen this kind of before. Who is Nick Saban's agent? Jimmy Sexton. Who is Lane Kiffin's agent? Jimmy Sexton, right? Not the first time people have noticed the Jimmy Sexton CAA influence on game day. And frankly, on a lot of ESPN programming, right? It's you can't get an objective viewpoint from some of the people on TV, right? I heard Herb Street say he and Fowler were talking about the situation during maybe it was right after the Florida Tennessee game, and Kirk says, I talked to Lane. He's totally focused on the Egg Bowl. He's not letting this outside noise distract him. Dude, he sent his family to those campuses the week with 2 games left in the season. One other thing, Bruce, I don't know that I would refer to Ole Miss as a lock in the playoff. It may seem that way. But if they lose to Mississippi State, I've heard what I don't think people have said, you hear a lot of people say, well, the committee might drop them if their coach leaves. I don't think it would be because the coach leaves. I think it would be if they lose the Egg Bowl and he leaves, because their resume is pretty thin. They beat Oklahoma. That's about it. Am I barking up the wrong tree here, Ralph?
No. And I wrote about that last night too, that like, I want to nip that in the bud. This idea that, oh no, they might get the Jordan Travis treatment, right? The committee might look at them differently now. I don't think that's the case at all. But as you said, I do want to emphasize that, like, first of all, like, let's have some common sense. The committee wouldn't do that. They haven't even seen them without Lane Kiffin, so that's part of the protocol. But if you look at the resume again, and we'll pivot over to the rest of the SEC and what else went on in the conference yesterday, because Oklahoma, keeps winning. If you look at Ole Miss's resume compared to like an Oklahoma, even though they beat Oklahoma and Georgia and some of these other SEC teams, at 10-2. That could be problematic for Ole Miss, especially with a loss to maybe the worst team or one of the 2 worst teams in the SEC. So yeah, I don't think that Ole Miss has a Kiffin issue with the committee. They might have a loss to Mississippi State issue with the committee.
Yeah, and people would crucify him if that happens, because clearly they'd say, "Oh, this has turned into a big distraction." All right, on the field Saturday, it wasn't the greatest set of games. I would say the most, impactful result, because, by the way, nobody in the top 14 lost on Saturday, but number 15 USC did. So they go to Oregon. They weren't expected to win in Eugene, but this could have been a big moment for Lane Kiffin if they did. Would have put them in the playoff hunt.
Lincoln Riley. You said Lane Kiffin.
Lane Kiffin's on my the L coaches, right? Lane is on my mind, obviously. Yeah. No, Lincoln Riley could have used a big W. 42-27 Oregon in a game that saw a lot of quarterbacks completing a lot of passes, mostly to their own team, but sometimes to the other team. Bruce, what is your takeaway? Does it make you change your opinion at all about whether Oregon, who's kind of played third fiddle in the Big Ten this year, could win the national championship?
I mean, they're dangerous. This is my feeling on them. I wouldn't be shocked if they lost at Washington this week. I don't think they will. But here's the deal with them. Their quarterback has elite arm talent, and he didn't play great against Indiana. Credit to Indiana, but he's very talented. They also were down a couple of receivers. Their offensive line is banged up. What I really like about them is they have a really good defensive front. They have an elite playmaker in Kenyon Sadiq, who's a matchup nightmare. The quarterback is talented. The running game is lethal. So wouldn't shock me if they went on a run. When I watched that game yesterday, I think we all agree this is kind of how we all thought it was going to go. USC has the firepower to give them some problems and score points. They're not that good on defense. They're okay, but they're not that, and they're really sloppy. And the sloppiness really shows up on the road. And that happened again with like one special teams debacle after another. Yeah. It's not the first time they've given up a long kickoff or long kick return for a touchdown. Yeah. They gave Oregon another fresh set of downs. It's just a lot of sloppiness. On one sense, to make this a USC thing for a second, I thought USC would be a 7-5, maybe 8-4 team coming into the year. They're probably going to be a 9-3 team, which is an improvement. But at the same time, I think it's just like, man, are the people who are skeptical on Lincoln Riley, have they seen anything that's going to change their mind? Yeah, they're encouraged. They have a really good recruiting class on the hook, but if you're going to be a top 10 teams have, that's what you're supposed to do, right? And you're supposed to have more than one of them. And I don't know. I just thought it was like Oregon handled its business. I mean, did you see it any differently, Ralph? Come or have any different takeaway from that?
Well, the game did go like I think we thought it would. I think we all picked Oregon to cover, or at least I did. I know I did. At least I think at least one or two of us did. My point with Oregon though is you mentioned the injuries, and I do wonder. I really like what I've seen from them. They are really physical. They really run the ball well and do it in an interesting way. It's not just that they're blowing people off the ball. They seem to scheme up some interesting runs. They held USC's running game to I've always been a little less than like super impressed by Oregon's defense under Tosh Lupoy. Always feel like, I wish that we would do this better, this would do that. But they totally shut the water off on USC's running game. And what I think about Oregon, Stu, is if and when they get to the playoff, and most likely when, because I think they'll handle their business next week against Washington, and they get a little time to get completely healthy. I feel like we haven't seen a fully uploaded Oregon team through these big games against Iowa, a pretty good Minnesota team that they crushed, a pretty good USC team that they took care of. I just wonder if like once they get fully operational with Decorian Moore and the offensive lineman back, man, like that to me might be a team. I've been skeptical if that's a team that can win a national championship. I think now I'm fully on board that a healthy Oregon team, I think, can win a national championship.
It could be the opposite of last year when that break before the playoff kind of hurt Oregon. They had been on such a roll for 13 games, right? They come back out against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. They don't look remotely like they did during the regular season. Maybe this is the opposite. Like you said, they could get healthy and be even better. It's hard in terms of them winning the national title. It's hard for me to totally forget the image of Indiana out physicaling them. But sometimes you find out later, oh, it was just a bad day. I do think Dante Moore makes a big difference for them. I want to flip it over to USC for a second, guys. I remember being surprised. The podcast episodes are all blurring together, but Bruce, at some point you said, hey, if they go 9-3, like that's good progress for Lincoln. It is, right? It's better than last year, but it still feels to me like this program is just kind of underwhelming. Lincoln Riley was such a big deal when they hired him, $11 million a year. There was an expectation, certainly by his fourth season, that they would be competing for national titles. And instead, they're probably going to go to the Alamo Bowl or something like that. If I'm a USC fan, I'm going, well, we have the number one recruiting class. That's nice. But, Bruce, you mentioned like more penalties. Like, if you're a USC fan, what gives you confidence now that that's ever going to happen?
I don't know if there anything is. I feel like it's hard to change a narrative after 4 years of something, especially the penalties and the sloppiness are the things, they're bad on special teams. And that can be the difference. Like Oregon's a more talented team. We were watching the game yesterday, and Coach Pete's point was like, Oregon looks like USC used to, in terms of like have a lot of NFL dudes, and they're just a better team. And I feel like there's a gap, and that usually doesn't get solved with one recruiting class, because it's not like, even if they end up with the number one class, somebody's going to end up with the 2 and 3, and they're going to have it stacked that way. You also, Mekhi Lemon feels like he is one of the 5 best players in college football. You lose some kind of, I don't want to say generational player, but been such an invaluable guy to them. I think it's the other stuff, though, that the questions on Lincoln Riley haven't changed. It's still the physicality that bleeds over into defense. It's still the attention to detail and everything that's not that's not scheming offensive plays, like at some point I remember thinking, man, Lincoln would be a phenomenal offensive coordinator for the 2028 Olympic flag team because he's like really good at just being very creative with those kinds of things and getting people open and different things like that. But it's the other stuff that feels like it's their undoing, right? And I don't, you're right. I did say 9-3 would be, and it's a step, but I just think it's like Lincoln can talk about how close they are. It's two really good teams. And I feel like we've heard this from Lincoln a lot whenever it's a bunch of microphones are around him. I don't know, Ralph, if you're a USC fan, like, are you just kind of resigned to until Lincoln leaves, or do you think Lincoln can actually get this thing to take a huge step forward and be a real national title contender?
So if you're bringing in elite players, yes, I think it's as simple as that. If they have a number one recruiting class, we'll see if they can add another one. There's talent there. I'll use a term that I use for Mario Cristobal a lot. He will recruit his way out of it. If Lincoln can recruit his way to the next level, then he can do it. Because I think at a certain point, if you have good enough players, whatever your shortcomings are as a coach, generally speaking, can be masked over. Here's my one take on USC. And of course, I'm going to bring my beloved analytics into this. Last year, USC won 7 games, right? Or maybe they won 8. They won 8 in a bowl, right? I think they won their bowl game to get to 8. They were 7-5 team in the regular season. But like most of the power ratings had them ranked somewhere between like 15 and 25, 15 and 20, right? Because they lost a ton of close games. They lost a ton of games that they should have won. This year, I think USC, you could possibly look through the lens and say, all they did was get a little better close game luck. They're not that much different than they were last year in terms of results. There were a couple of 2 wins. If they beat UCLA, it'd be 2 wins different. But if you sort of like do a deeper dive, they're better than they were last year, but maybe they just, got a couple of bounces that went their way this year. And it's that close game luck that is hard to control. That really is the difference between 2024 USC and 2025 USC, other than, and not necessarily Lincoln became a much better coach, Stu.
Yep. I'm going to pivot now to the SEC. It was a lot of teams playing a lot of Group of 5 and FCS teams. Probably the most notable result, though, Oklahoma beats Missouri 17-6, totally shuts down Ahmad Hardy in that Mizzou, really good running game. You talk about they're not a lock yet, but they end with an LSU team that struggled to move the ball on Western Kentucky. I think we're very close to seeing 10-2 OU make the playoff. That being said, Ralph, they under 300 yards of offense for the second straight week. So if they make the playoff, that's a big accomplishment. But do you feel like, okay, that's it? That's the ceiling?
I do. I just think in today's day and age, like you got to be able to put up, you got to be able to get into the 30s points wise. And I know we talk, well, Mateer is getting healthier. Man, I don't know. I just don't think he is that good. I think it's like he is a good player. He's an athletic player. He's a tough as nails player. He is an improvement for them.
Do you think he's better than you think he's better than Riley Leonard?
I think they're about the same.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's about and that's a good point. Like Riley Leonard got to the national championship.
There's no Jeremiah Love in Norman, Oklahoma.
But there's no Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price in Norman. They can't run the ball either, and it ends up being on Mateer to run the ball. So yeah, their defense is great. Their defense is terrific. It's the best defense in the SEC. It's one of the best in the country. But Alabama moved the ball on them. Ole Miss moved the ball on them. So it's not like they're such a shutdown. 2011 LSU Alabama defense that you say like, well, they can win the national championship by scoring 24 points a game. No, they probably are going to need to get into the high 20s. And I just don't see, Bruce, them being able to do that against playoff teams.
I think they can win a playoff game because
Okay.
again, I'm a little higher on Mateer. I think he's a little better than Riley Leonard, but I watched them yesterday. As soon as they hit the big slant to Sustanian, he's game breaking speed, and we've seen this from him almost weekly, where he just runs away from everybody. But I think you see they're coached by a defensive minded guy, and I feel like he is leaning into that, and he's very comfortable in playing those games. I'd made the comparison. This is unfair, probably unfair to make, but because they offensively they're different schematically, but there's some Stoops' first really good team there that won a national title and I think beat Florida State like 13-2 in the national title game.
Mm-hmm.
They were a very defense heavy team, and I feel like you never realized how good they were. I feel like that tends to happen where we undervalue teams that are really good in defense and win these kind of games. They force turnovers. They don't just get turnovers. So I think I'm probably a little higher on OU than you guys, or than you might be, Ralph. But I don't think they can win a national title this way. I think they could probably win a playoff game. But it's very impressive to watch them. I mean, like yesterday, they just completely. I came away watching that going, man, like Bo Perbula has no chance out here. It was just an ugly day for Eli Drinkwitz's team.
How many Bowens? It seems like they've got like 15 Bowens, and they're just everywhere. Those two guys, Peyton and Eli, are really, really good players.
So I hate to do the cop out here. I think it would depend on who the matchup is in the first round.
That's fair.
I would actually it would be really fascinating to see them play Oregon, because on the one hand, you think, well, they can't shut down that offense for 60 minutes, right? And it's like, well, they completely shut down Ahmad Hardy. Like, yeah, maybe they could, but no, I don't think you can beat Oregon 17-6. I have a trouble visioning shutting down Notre Dame for a whole game. But look, at the end of the day, it's kind of like Tennessee last year. I don't know if you guys can put yourself in the headspace of the end of that regular season. It was like, okay, Tennessee, you went 10-2. You beat Alabama. Obviously, you're going to make the playoff. You earned it. But I don't really have much faith in you beyond that. And sure enough, like Ohio State was able to do what they did to Tennessee. So just to set things up, Ralph, you're our tiebreaker expert. Going into the last weekend of the regular season, who needs to do what to make the SEC championship game?
So Texas A&M that's simple, right? Obviously, if A&M wins, they're in. If A&M loses, it gets a little dicey, even for A&M, right? Losing to Texas could trigger a whole bunch of multiple tiebreaker scenarios where their opponent winning percentage is not going to be as good. We mentioned about how Texas Tech had a pretty good draw, right, in the SEC this year with all the teams at the back end of the standings. Well, that would work against the Aggies if they lose to Texas, and they could end up being out.
I don't think they can make the game if they lose to Texas. Am I wrong?
I think
it would depend on if there's some upsets.
Yeah, they could still, because Ole Miss could lose the Egg Bowl, Alabama could lose the Iron Bowl, and they would have 2 SEC losses. So there's still a path for them to make it if they lose. The tricky thing becomes if all the favorites win, A&M is in easily, but suddenly Alabama beating Georgia wouldn't matter, because you'd have a 3-way tie between Ole Miss, Georgia, and Alabama, and the head-to-head gets thrown out. And again, we end up going to, because they all didn't play each other, the head-to-head gets thrown out, and you'd end up going to more of a, opponent's winning percentage situation. I think that plays into Alabama's favor. The problem is you literally have to wait to see some of the results of Kentucky's, I'm trying to think of like a team that might still have an SEC game left, where the record could change and influence the opponent winning percentage. I think if all the favorites win out, Texas A&M, Alabama is the most likely scenario in the SEC championship game. If Alabama or Ole Miss loses, that opens the door for Georgia.
Yeah, I think Alabama's winning in. At this point, there aren't that many permutations left. So yeah, I think they're weighted in, and then it's just a matter of would they play A&M or would they play Georgia? Ole Miss needs everything to blow up to make it. All right, now put on your advanced degree cap. ACC.
So ACC.
How many different combos do we have there?
Well, here's the cool thing though is the ACC did figure itself out yesterday when Georgia Tech lost to Pitt, insofar as I'm pretty sure Virginia and SMU control it, right?
Yes.
If those two teams win, they play for the ACC championship. Holy cow, SMU might make the playoff for the second year in a row. Wow.
Well, making the ACC championship game for a second year in a row after moving up from the American. I don't know what that says about the ACC. They lost to two middle of the pack,
That it
to
stinks.
lower of the pack Big 12 teams.
Yeah. Jim, you're gonna get a note from Jim Phillips there, Bruce.
Call it as I see.
The most interesting thing about the ACC is there is still a way for Miami to get in there, and that's, I think, we don't want to go down the Miami rabbit hole again today, but like Miami is going to be the highest ranked of the ACC teams, and for them to get into the ACC championship game would be really beneficial to the ACC to get Miami into the playoff. Basically, they need either Virginia Tech or obviously they have to beat Pittsburgh on Saturday, but they also need either UVA or SMU to lose. SMU plays Cal, UVA plays Virginia Tech. It's the ACC. You never know, folks. But there is still a path for Miami to get in there. There's still a path for Pitt to get in there if the Panthers beat Miami. I think there might be a road for Georgia Tech to get in there, though I haven't figured it out.
You left out the most intriguing one. Duke is still very much alive. 6-5
gosh.
Duke is still
And
very
if-
much
if
alive.
Jim Phillips has issue, that would be the comeback is if you don't think your conference is really suspect, the fact that Duke still has a
They
chance.
lost to UConn.
And got beat just pretty soundly by Tulane.
Hey, don't be
I want-
dissing UConn, man. Yeah, Jim Moore has done a really nice job up with the Huskies. They are undefeated in regulation, to use Les
All right,
Miles'
save
line.
it for your shout out, Ralph.
I want to just make sure I have it right here, but it's not a totally unrealistic thing. Duke has to beat Wake, and then Cal has to beat SMU. Cal did lose 31-10 to Stanford.
So Duke has a better chance of making the playoff, making the title game than actually Miami does. Because Miami also needs Cal to beat SMU. Cal, which by the way got blown out by Stanford yesterday.
I think you're right, because that scenario I just said is also requires Miami to beat Pitt. So if Miami beats Pitt, Duke wins, Miami beats Pitt, and Cal upsets SMU, Duke and not Miami at 10-2.
Which doesn't make
would
sense
get
because
in.
they didn't play against each other.
Yeah, but
that's
it's a
maybe
three-way
Manny-
tiebreaker.
maybe Manny
Tiebreakers,
Diaz's revenge.
common
This is where
opponents,
the
blah, blah, blah.
ACC, because it's not one of those SEC or Big Ten where you're almost a lock to get multiple teams, should say, hey, our tiebreaker is going to be, we're just going with the higher ranked team in the CFP.
That's what the American does, really. And that's why the Americans set up
It's
the
smart.
next week. Like Tulane is going to probably get in because they're ranked. Like they're not going to mess around with these, like, all these kinds of crazy tiebreakers.
The American leadership is very shrewd. Good on them. Guys, to me, the nuttiest game yesterday, and what was kind of probably the weakest of the weekends we've had, just because of a lot of those cupcake games, was a game I didn't expect to be paying such close attention to. And it's a game that blew my mind, just to think that Morgan Scalley and Kyle Whittingham's defense could give up almost 500 yards rushing. By the way, K-State, even after rushing for 472 yards at Utah, is still only ranked 10th in rushing offense in the Big 12. It's not like this was a vintage Barry Switzer Oklahoma team or something like that. This is just like kind of and we can get into this in a bit because it's been a really nutty year for K-State. Last week, they almost lost to a horrible Oklahoma State team. They barely ran for 100 yards against the Cowboys. And then they had to have a frantic comeback to win, 51-47 against us. But just like I
Utah,
said, I
yeah,
could
Utah.
not get over. Joe Jackson runs for almost 300 yards. It was
How do
just
you run for
bizarre.
470 yards and lose? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Credit to Devin Dampier, who was a 59-yard run that set up on 4th and 1 that set up the go-ahead touchdown. Yeah, so we want to talk for a second about, I mean, it was such an emotional game that I believe both coaches broke down in their post-game press conference, but Chris Klieman's was particularly notable if we want to play that clip.
And I know a lot of people thought we'd come over here and lay down, and that maybe the kids had cashed it in, because I've heard it enough. I've cashed it in. I've heard the players have cashed it in. We need to get new leadership here. We need to get new players, new coaches. I'm tired of it. I gotta be honest with you, I'm tired of it. I've given my friggin' ass life for this place for 7 years. I've given everything for 7 years. And I think I deserve a little bit of respect.
When you cover a sport nationally, it's hard to have a pulse of every single fan base. But my first reaction was, are there really K-State fans who want to fire Chris Klieman? Is that really a thing? And is Chris Klieman maybe spending too much time on the message boards? But Ralph, what's going on there?
So, yeah, I think that the last 2 seasons have been when the Big 12 readjusted, Texas and Oklahoma left. I think a lot of people looked at K-State and said, "Oh, we're in position here to maybe be one of the big dogs in this conference. We're one of the favorites the last couple of years to get to the playoff, and now for 2 straight years, they're not even going to get to the Big 12 championship game." So it's been pretty disappointing around Manhattan. But, and I think they stepped up to keep Avery Johnson. I don't know exactly what their budget looks like in terms of players and how much their roster costs. I know it's not Texas Tech level, but I still think that there was a very high expectation for Kansas State the last couple of years, and to just really be an afterthought in the Big 12 is a big disappointment. But as you said, like, this guy's done a pretty good job. It is Kansas State.
The doctor's calling somebody.
Well, I'm gonna let
Pick up
Bruce
on
take it
page
from
1.
here. I'm gonna let Bruce take it from here. But yeah, it's been a difficult couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who I think we all have an immense amount of respect for. It's almost like guys like that tend to get taken for granted because whoever's there. I mean, Avery Johnson's play has been disappointing compared to the expectations of where they've been, at least to this point, and maybe next year is a different year there. Yeah, it's just, I think to see the reaction of him, it's just like, it sinks in. Again, I agree with what you said, Stu. I didn't realize there was like K-State fans who looked at it like all of a sudden this is a team that's 3-9 3 years in a row or anything like that, where you kind of lost the connection to the place, or just something's off. Yes, it's true that like he's lost a couple of really good offensive coaches on his staff. First it was Colin Klein, then Connor Riley, who is one of the best O-line coaches in college football. And both those guys, one went to the Cowboys, the other one went to Texas A&M. And not to say they didn't replace him with capable assistants, but I think it's hard in this day and age to get it right, because the margin for error in a conference like that, I feel like where everybody's pretty comparable is probably different than we think it is at other places.
Can I just jump in real quick, Stu? That's the point I was going to make. They got blown up by Texas Tech. Their other 5 losses are by a total of 16 points. And it sort of speaks to this overarching theme that we've talked about a lot in college football these days. The resetting of expectations, understanding that especially within conferences, the world is getting smaller. And all of a sudden, the difference between you having a very good year and having a really disappointing year is like a couple of injuries, a couple of kicks, a couple of turnovers. Like, you can flip these teams. The difference between 9-3 and 6-6 is just, it's pretty slim. And I think that's what Chris Klieman is getting caught up in. Is that coaching? hey, you are what your record says you are, but I just like the margin is very slim here, slimmer than maybe it's ever been before in college football. And you see these coaches getting judged in ways that maybe isn't totally fair because of the margins tightening.
Yeah, I think, well, look, like I am sure hovering all over all that in Manhattan is that they experienced Bill Snyder, right? They experienced having one of the greatest coaches, I would say, in the history of the sport. They experienced a nice long run where they were often a top 10 type team. Times have changed. The Big 12 has changed considerably. And to your point, Ralph, like that level of parity is especially pronounced in the Big 12. Unless you're willing to, unless you have the means to spend the kind of money Texas Tech is spending on its roster, you are probably not going to consistently win 10 games a year in that conference where the talent difference between number 2 and number 8 is next to nothing. Right now, that doesn't mean this wasn't a really disappointing year. I think they came into the year. I think I picked them to win the Big 12. A lot of people did. They're 5-6, right? Definitely a dud year. But they did win the Big 12 not that long ago. They did beat an undefeated TCU team in the Big 12 title game. He's beaten top 10 teams. It is not a given. It is not Kansas State's birthright in football that they would do those kind of things. That is, give the guy, as he said, right? Give the guy a little credit. Let's do our shout outs. And I will start with you, Bruce.
I'm going to go with shout out to Willie Simmons and FIU. They beat a pretty good Jacksonville State team yesterday to go to 6-5, becoming bowl eligible for the first time since 2019. Willie Simmons is a former FSU quarterback way back in the day. Bounced around, had been a head coach multiple places, did a really good job. Took this job, and he's had a really, really impressive first year. So shout out to him and FIU. Ralph?
So I am going to go into the Ivy League, those scrappy underdog kids who never really get a break. It's good to see them getting a chance to play in the FCS playoffs, but that is cool. It is cool. For the first time, the FCS playoffs will include Ivy League teams. The Harvard-Yale game was to determine the Ivy League champion and the first automatic bid for an Ivy League team into the playoffs. Yale, behind Coach Tony Reno, his son, the quarterback Dante Reno. Those guys could be probably cousins of mine, I'm assuming, some way, shape, or form, distant cousins. Jerry Ostrowski is the offensive coordinator there. He's done a really good job. He's kind of a veteran coach who's bounced around and landed it at Yale and come up with a very good offense there. Yale beats Harvard. Yale will be in the FCS playoffs. In fact, Yale beat Harvard, and Harvard was undefeated. They beat them running away, too. Vegas had something in mind on that game. Vegas actually had Yale as the favorite in that game, even though Harvard was undefeated. So those guys know what they're talking about. Yale will be in the playoff, and Harvard would most likely be in the playoff too as an at-large team. But shout out to Coach Reno and his son Dante and the Yale Bulldogs for winning the Ivy League.
I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, that is a big deal that the Ivy League, after all these years, right? It's the FCS, former Division I AA, has existed since 1978, and this is the first time they're allowing their teams to compete in the playoff. I do not have a Group of Five or FCS shout out this week. I'm going to the Big Ten, and I'm going to give a shout out to Luke Fickell. Who saw this coming when they were 2-6 and getting blown out every week? And Chris McIntosh, the AD, announces he's coming back next year. And my thought was, oof, that is really going to backfire if they finish 2-10. Not only are they not going to finish 2-10, they've somehow beaten 2 ranked teams in the last 3 weeks. And maybe you want to say Washington's not really should be a ranked team. That was kind of a weird game, but they took it to Brett Bielema's Illini 27-10, and second field storming in 3 weeks, by the way, Madison. And guys, I got to imagine that's extra sweet for Badgers fans to do it against Bielema.
No doubt. I mean, he did some very good things in Madison, but I think that Brett's attitude, I think I can imagine a rival would like to humble Brett Bielema, and I imagine Wisconsin got a pretty good feel pretty good about doing that.
All right. Remember, every episode of The Audible is available on YouTube at Audible Show. We will be back with a new show on Tuesday morning. Who knows? Maybe Lane Kiffin will have made a decision by then. Maybe not. And it's Thanksgiving week, so we will actually have another episode shortly after that one. We'll see you then.